Perfect. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our course cafe for October. I thought it was really fitting to choose kind of like a spooky topic. So that's why we're doing the Four Horsemen of the Course Apocalypse. And how I kind of came up with these four factors is I was thinking about it. I'm like, no one sits down and like sets out to create a really horrible course experience. Like, I don't think anyone is like, you know what? I want to give my people the worst experience ever. I don't want them to finish. I want them to be confused. I don't want them to like enjoy themselves. Like, that's not what we're doing. It's like creating a signature program in whatever that looks like, whether it's a group program, a membership, a tiny course, a workshop. It's a labor of love. We're going, how do I take my time and my energy and my passion and my knowledge and turn it into something that can help other people? And yet we've all taken or experienced something that has been like less than great. Like we've sat through a workshop or a webinar or a course where we've gone like, this is just so not for me. And so kind of in my experience working behind the scenes on so many courses, I think I've done like at least 150 different course designs at this point, whether it's a certification or a course or existing courses that come to me that I have to restructure and re-support so that the courses or the students are getting the best experience possible. I was like, okay, I am seeing some patterns here. And the nice thing about seeing patterns is once we can identify what those factors are, we can take intentional steps to try to reduce them as much as possible in our courses. And now the thing, like the giant caveat that I want to put on all of this is that you're a human teaching other humans. We're not programming for robots. We're not designing for AI, which means these factors are always going to be present. There's always going to be people who get stuck. There's going to be people where life happens and they don't finish your course. You're going to have moments where you show up and you're like maybe not at your A game. So the goal of everything that I'm sharing today is to give you as much as possible to kind of premeditate as much as possible through the intentional design and structure of our program, through how you show up as a facilitator to minimize the negative possibilities of people getting stuck or people exiting the program, knowing that it's still going to happen. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The best learning is the learning that happens when it needs to happen. And so sometimes people sign up for a course and they're like, it's not actually the right time. And then they come back to it when it is the right time. So we are going to start with the first horseman, which is procrastination. And so I like to start here because it's the one that no one wants to start with because they keep putting it off. And so what we're going to talk about with procrastination is what does that look like in the course experience? So everything that we're doing is to try to get people to engage with your materials, to engage with the experience so that they can take action, so that they can take results. But if they're putting off even wanting to engage with it, then like they're not going to get those results. And so for most of us, I think everyone on this call, but you can put in the chat if I'm wrong, I think we're all teaching adults here. And so when we are working with adults, we are dealing with people with very competing priorities. We've got other calls on our attention. We have family, we have children, we have health, we have other work, we have our businesses, we have all of these things. And so what we're wanting to do to defeat kind of the horsemen of procrastination is to set up our learning experience so that there are as few barriers to accessing it as possible. Because what we want to avoid happening is our people going, you know what, this seems really important. I'm going to come back to this later when I have more time, when I have a clear space in my schedule, when I have a clear space in my brain and I can actually focus on it. So some of the ways that we can remove barriers to people engaging with our learning experience is by, first of all, making it seem as least intimidating as possible. So one of the ways we can do this is by reducing the actual length of our materials. So if you have any sort of recorded materials like video lessons or audio lessons or anything like that, instead of sitting and showing people like, here's a 45-minute video or here's an hour-long video, how can you break that up into nice bite-sized pieces so that, we can compare this to when people send you like, I don't know if you've ever had a friend like send you like a TED Talk on YouTube and they're like, oh, this is so good. You have to listen to this. And you open it up and it's like 15 minutes long and you're like, I don't have time for this, even if I did this on 2 or 3 times speed. Versus if they're like, oh, I saw this snippet of this TED Talk. It's really, really good. It's like a 2 or 3 minute clip. You're probably going to watch it right then and there and be like, wow, that was great. That stuck with me really, really well. So this is like one of the quickest things that we can do that is completely within our control, is making things nice and bite-sized. And so if you're like, okay, that's great, but I don't have audio or video in my course, it's all text, or it's live calls, or it's, something that's not necessarily pre-recorded, asking yourself, how can you make it as easy as possible for people to access that? So saying things like, how can you set up your schedule so that you can make time for these calls? If you can't come to the calls, I've given you a transcript and I've given you a recording, and I've actually broken it up into like 4 pieces for you, or I've set it up in a player where you can put it on 2 or 3 times speed. If it's text-based, have you highlighted it so people can like skim through the transcript easily and find what they need? Or if you're giving them homework or you're giving them action items, is it something that you can break down into small steps? So that instead of saying, okay, I want you to go and do this activity that's going to take you an hour, being like, here are 3 20-minute sprints. If you want to do them back to back, go for it. But if you just want to do one, that's totally fine. Or even smaller, this first piece can be done in 10 minutes. I find that by breaking things down smaller, but also giving people that choice or that control over their experience, really is more likely to have people going like, oh yeah, I could do this, no problem. So it kind of like plays a little bit of like a psychology game with them. I see that Alice asks, do you think there are times when bite-sized is not good or appropriate or would turn people off? So yes and no. Bite-sized is, what we want to make sure is that we're being intentional about how we break up the bites. If we're just breaking them up for the sake of saying we've broken it up, so that it's like, oh, you now have these like 3 2-minute lessons instead of 1 6-minute lesson, and there's not like a reason why you've broken it. It's not just like one concept, or it's not just one action thing. Then people are going to go, okay, like you just made me like start, stop a whole bunch of times in a row. And sometimes we really are cultivating intentional experiences. So one of my clients, they work with couples who are healing erotic energy in their relationships. And so some of those exercises are going to require intentional time where you're getting into something quite deep and meaningful that you can't break up into 20 minutes. Like it needs to be an hour-long time. So in those cases, that's where you want to be transparent with people about like, this is how much time it's going to take. This is the environment you're going to need for success. This is why it's this amount of time. The more that you can give people the reasoning behind it, tell them what to expect, and tell them how to kind of set themselves up for success, there's going to be less of that, like almost like excuse creation of like, oh, I can't do this yet because. In general, the bite-sized is the way to go, unless you can think of a really, really strong reason why not to. And like in the case of like, okay, it's not going to be energetically sound, or it's not going to support them in the exercise or the activity that they have to do. But the thing with the bite-sized learning is it helps from a couple different angles. It helps from how our brain actually processes information and how much we can take in at a time. It helps if you have any neurodivergent learners who need things broken up into like smaller pieces. And in general, it just helps people who are busy, because it's like this, it's a sense of achievement of like, yes, I've watched 2 lessons instead of like, I've put off watching the same lesson for 4 days in a row. So that's kind of one way of looking at procrastination. Now, Karen actually brought up another way of looking at procrastination when we were chatting over email, which I absolutely loved, which is that sometimes it's not a matter of battling priorities. Sometimes people procrastinate because they're afraid of change. They're like, I know what my life it looks like. I know what these habits look like. I know I'm kind of used to my status quo. And the idea of getting to somewhere new, the idea of like actually taking these actions to make my life better is terrifying. And so this all depends on, what you're comfortable with and what your topics are and how you want to support your people. But one of the ways of kind of supporting people when you know that the procrastination is coming from a place of fear is to just acknowledge it and speak to the human and just say to them, like, I know this next module is something you're going to want to put off because it feels really scary. And here's what I want to let you know about what's on the other side. So how can you talk to them? How can you talk them through this transformation? Can you let them know what the experience is going to look like? Like, okay, I know the first week of trying this new habit, you're going to want to quit 500 times. And every time you want to quit, I want you to come back to this video and I'm going to be there on video going, don't quit. Can you tell them, remind them of their why, of why they signed up for this program, why they want this change? Can you give them affirmations or meditations or audio? Like, what do your people need to be supported through that fear? And that's going to be really unique to your people. It's going to be really unique to your topic, but it is something by thinking about, like, not only how do we support people away from procrastinating, but what is driving that procrastination can really help us make intentional choices in our program. So I'd love to just kind of pause there and hear if anyone has any questions so far about how procrastination shows up in learning experiences and how we can support our people through it. Alice, I see, would you do that for a smaller course? In the sense of like calling out why people might be like afraid of change? Is that what you're referencing?
No, I meant in terms of like the support I offer. So like one of my mini courses is a $111 course and the person stopped like halfway through. So typically when I think about like reaching out, offering more of like my personal attention to people, it would be, I would think like for like a more expensive program. And like I've been struggling with like, well, do I reach out to this person or not? Like if I bought $100 course, I don't know if I would be annoyed if the person was reaching out to me, because it's like, no, I bought this to do it on my own. So it's like, how will people perceive that additional support?
Yeah, absolutely. Such a great question. So this is where, especially for like the smaller priced course or smaller like transformational experiences, I think tech is your friend here. If you have a way of automating a check-in email, depending on the course software you use, a lot of course platforms will let you like have inactivity emails like, hey, I noticed you haven't like logged in. And even sometimes it can just be automated from like, you bought a month ago, I'm going to send you an email a month later and just say like, I want to know how things are going. Because the other thing too is that like there are a million reasons why someone stops in the middle of a course, and we want to make sure that there's no like guilt or shame that comes through of like, why haven't you finished this? Because it could be they got what they needed and they're out there being like, wow, Alice, you nailed it, this is great, I don't need anything else. It could be that life happened, it could be that they're like, I'll come back to this later. So that's where I think kind of sending like automated emails can be really helpful, or baking in like for instance, like in some of my self-study courses, I call it my SOS kit. And when people are feeling overwhelmed, they go to the SOS kit and there's a video called, if you're overwhelmed, watch this. And it's a little message I've recorded for them.
I actually did that too. And
yeah.
That they would get that later on. So if they've ever stopped doing the course, go to that place, and the person has not gone to that place.
Yeah, I would also say if it's one person right now, I wouldn't stress too much. It became a pattern where like, you're like, wow, 95% of people are stopping at this point in the course. Then that's why I'd say like, okay, you need to get on a call and we're going to figure this out. For now, I wouldn't stress about it too much. I think if you wanted to send like a general, like, how are things going? How can I support you? Like email to everyone who's bought, but I wouldn't, especially at that price point, feel like you have to dive in individually. Yeah, such great questions. Any other questions about procrastination before we move on to the next horseman? Good. Okay. If any questions do pop up, there's like the raise hand feature that you can use for Zoom, or you can pop things into the chat, whichever you prefer. But let's hop on over to confusion, our second horseman. So confusion is another one of those nasty dudes that when confusion pops up, that leads to people exiting the learning experience. Because when we're confused, we're like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to go to something that I do know what to do. I'm going to go to somewhere where I do feel comfortable and I know what's going on. And so we want to think about how do we, again, combat confusion and how it shows up in our programs. And so there's a couple different ways we can do this. And obviously it depends on like the level where confusion is showing up. So at the macro level of the program, so the high structural level of the program, one of the best things you can do is have a really clear, solid orientation to your program. Now, lucky for all of you, November's Course Cafe is on program orientations. So I'm going to be diving into how to actually create a super strong program orientation. But to give you kind of like the cliff notes of it, is we want to provide our people with a roadmap so that they always know exactly what's happening, why it's happening, how it fits into their journey, so that there's never an issue of like, okay, wait, I thought I signed up for this course on how to build a website, and now you're talking to me about like my brand values. And it's like, that feels totally incongruent. It's like, well, no, we need you to establish your brand values first, because they play into how we're going to do this thing later. So being able to give people this high level orientation to like, this is the journey I'm taking you on. This is why we're doing, like why we're starting here. This is where we go next. This is what's happening, as well as orientations like, this is where you can find things in your course platform. This is where the materials live. This is how you get tech support. This is how you access the community. Like literally, I like to compare it to like an orientation to like college or university. And you think about how much time they spend like touring around all the first years to like, this is your residence. This is your cafeteria. This is where you find here. This is like your community leader. How can we create that experience in our programs? My cat's playing with my headphones here. So that people know where to find things, they know where to go, they know what to expect. You know, we've given them a heads up if there's going to be like anything that might be a bit more confusing, so that there's not really like a surprise coming down their way. So that's what we can do at the macro level of the program. Now, at the more micro level, we want to make sure that we're always being as clear as possible. And it seems really obvious, but it's amazing how easy it is to skip the clarity. And the easiest way to kind of reorient yourself and make sure that you're being as clear as possible is at the end of every video, every audio, every text. Anytime you are teaching or communicating anything, do a little summary and clearly state what they need to do next. So sometimes we can fall into the trap of being like, okay, great. So now go do your homework and we'll see you later. Or like, okay, great. See you in the next lesson. But really re-summarizing like, okay, so just to let you know, what we've covered is the 4 horsemen of the course apocalypse, and they are 1, 2, 3, 4. What I want you to do with this information is you're going to go to the workbook, which is linked below, and you're going to do the exercise that's titled this. The more specific you can be, I want you to do this exercise. It's going to take you this amount of time. You can find the materials here. We want to almost feel like we're spoon feeding people. Like we want to make it as easy as possible. So there's no opportunity for people to go, wait, what am I supposed to be doing right now? Where am I going to find that? It's okay if you repeat yourself, because no one's ever going to be like, oh, darn, Leanne just made that way too easy for me. Like, how dare they? Or, you know, oh man, I'm so annoyed that Michelle was like so clear in what I needed to be doing. Like no one's going to complain about that. They're going to be like, this is awesome. Thank you. So the more that we can be really, really clear, so there's never confusion around like what they need to be doing, when they need to be doing it, how they need to be doing it, how often they need to be doing it, all of those things. It's almost like we want to be building them a recipe.
Emily, do you think it would be too awkward to record like one extra short video, or would you say like, no, re-record the original to make it flow better?
So if you're kind of retrofitting an existing course, you have a couple different options. I would probably actually edit it onto the existing videos so that they don't have the act of like one video, second video. And what you can do is you can cover the edit with like a slide or something like that. So they're not like, wait a second, now you're in a totally different lighting and a totally different outfit. It's like, oh, this is intentional. This is our little, you can even give it a cute name. Like this is our recap moment, or this is our action plan, or like something like that. If you're like, wow, that sounds like so much work, at the very least, you can put it in text underneath the videos, like your action step, do this next, to summarize, something like that. So if you're like, I don't have the bandwidth for re-recording right now, totally fine. At the very least, you can put it in text. Yeah. Any questions about confusion and how it shows up and kind of making those changes at the macro and the micro level in your program? Okay, all right. So now we're going to move to someone that shows up so often in the programs. It's like confusion's twin brother. It's always there. And that is overwhelm. So we've talked about procrastination. We've talked about confusion. Now we're going to talk about overwhelm. I would say overwhelm is probably the biggest factor that shows up in a negative course experience. And the reason that overwhelm shows up is because we all care so much about our people. We care about them so much that we're like, I'm going to give them absolutely everything I think that could be helpful for them. It's like, I'm going to give them this training. I'm going to give them this resource. I'm going to give them this, that, the other. And before we know it, we're throwing so many things into our programs. And that's because there's this like nasty little narrative that floats around in the online learning space that is like value comes from the amount that you give your people. I see this all the time where people go, okay, I've created this course. It has 18 modules. It has 500 lessons. It has a 3,000 page workbook. What should I price it at? And we have this thing of feeling like, oh, my course isn't going to have value if it has less in it. When in reality, the most valuable thing that you can do for your people is to look at what's the journey I want to take my people on, and how have I intentionally curated every single element of this journey to support them so that they have exactly what they need. And anything that feels like, oh, it might be nice if they have this, we tuck it somewhere where it's not going to be overwhelming for them, where they're not having to make a decision of like, oh, do I need to look at all of these things, or do I just need to look at these things that I've chosen? So how we combat overwhelm is, again, on the macro level and the micro level of the program. On the macro level of the program, we want to be looking at how we're structuring our journeys to make sure that we are intentionally leading our people from where they're coming into the experience to where they want to go, to where that transformation is, that end goal of the program. And every step of the way, we want to be asking ourselves, what do my people need to do to take one step forward on this journey? Not what do they need to know, what do they need to do? We want to take an action approached lens to this journey. And the reason is that transformation comes from taking action. It doesn't come from getting fire hosed with information or getting all the knowledge like squirreled away that we could possibly have. It comes from when we implement what we're learning. And so when we focus on action first, that gives us a really, really powerful lens of discernment for what needs to go in the program. Because when we're like, oh, it might be nice if I teach them this concept, we can go, does this concept help them take action quicker, easier, more effective? Is it going to move them along this journey? Or is it just a thing that I think is really nice for them to know, which point probably doesn't need to go in there? So we want to make sure that the structure of the journey is really clearly put together. It's really clearly architected to lead people to where they want to go. Then on the micro level of how we actually assemble the content, again, we want to have those nice bite-sized pieces. So similar to what we were talking about with procrastination around keeping things short and sweet, not only does it create like less of that intimidation factor of like, ooh, now I need to sit down and watch this like 45-minute lesson, but also just psychologically with how we process information and how we learn, our brains, like after about 15 minutes of direct instruction, so like people talking to us, they're full. They're like, I've got what I've needed. And we need to then put it into action. We need to put it into implementation. And that can be by like being asked questions. That can be by sitting and reflecting. That can be by taking action. So if you've noticed, about every 10 minutes on this course cafe, I've been checking in with you, been asking questions. Because if I just sat here and just talked at you for the entire hour, I can guarantee you would not be walking away with very much. You'd be like, oh, great. I think she said something about procrastination in the beginning, so I'm going to focus on that. And so what we want to do is making sure that we are actually setting things up. So not only is it not overwhelming from like an energetic sense of like, oh, the stuff coming at me, all these things I have to do, but also from our brains of how much our brain can hold and learn and process and turn into transformation. So by making sure that we are taking an action-focused lens, that also is going to give us a reality check of how many things we're asking our people to do at once. Because if we're going, all right, to get from point A to point B, there's 50 actions they have to do. Sometimes when we're focusing on content first, we can put like 20 of those actions in one module without realizing it. Instead of mapping out like, okay, this is the first step they have to do. It's going to take them 10 or 20 minutes. This is the next step they have to do. It's going to take them about 30 minutes. By getting a clear sense of what we're actually asking our people to do, we can get a realistic sense of the timing that they're going to need, instead of creating a situation where people are like, oh my goodness, you just asked me to plan out my entire course launch in a module, and now I already feel behind because it's taking me so long. And it can create that that shame and that overwhelm of like, is it me? Because our learners are very quick to assume they're the problem when they're not. It's just the structure of the learning experience. So when it comes to overwhelm, we really want to be intentional about making sure that things are actionable, making sure that things are bite-sized, and making sure that we're being really, really clear, like we talked about with confusion, being really clear about what needs to be done when. So I'd love to check in and see, how are we feeling about overwhelm? Oh, Michelle, yes.
I actually I sent you a question on the chat, but I actually had a second question. So the first one, it's in the chat, is, can extra material be provided like as a bonus?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so that's where, when we're providing extra material, I always want to do like kind of that intentional check of like, why are we providing it? So if it's just like, oh, you know what I've heard from my clients is that like this article has actually been really helpful for extra context, or you know what, sometimes this can be really interesting for people. So if it's something that's like an interesting or fun fact, or like it's a nice to have, not a need to have, I do like to tuck it in like a FAQ library or a resource library or bonuses or something where if we think about how the actual platform looks, it's not competing with the main things that people need to be focusing on. It's just like tucked somewhere else, where even in the lesson, you could say like, hey, I've linked to an article in the resource library. So if you're like, ooh, this is super interesting, I want to dive deeper. So for instance, one of my clients has a group program on healing from a breakup. And one of the concepts that she teaches is attachment style. Now, for the purpose of her program, she doesn't need people to be experts in attachment theory. She doesn't need to go super, super deep into the different attachment styles. She just needs to kind of give them like first level of it. But she also knows that introducing that concept sparks a lot of things for her people. So she said she includes other resources kind of tucked in another part of the program where it's like, just grab something for you and you want to research more about it, or do you want to read more about it? I've linked some of my favorite articles and books in this section.
That might work for me because I'm just going to get to know you now, but I'm a retirement coach and I have an academic background. And I think besides my own point of view, I bring in evidence, about what contributes to thriving. And I find that most of the women that sign up, and I've been only teaching live, I actually haven't created a course. Now's the time to do that. They actually are fascinated by the theory. So I was trying to figure out, just like your client, where do you put that information so people feel like they're getting the basis for these kinds of things. So I guess that would work. That would work. What you suggested about a resource library.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't have to go into all of it.
Yeah, you could pull the most salient parts, like especially if you have any kind of like sexy statistics or things, like a little number like, oh, did you know that like 36% of people who do X equal Y or whatever, like you can pull out those little bits or those little things from your research, because having that kind of like scientifically sound support to what you're teaching can be really, really powerful. But also, like you said, if it's like too much theory, people can be a bit like, oh my goodness, what's happening? So finding that balance of tucking the extras into like a bonus thing. If, oh, you want to learn more about this, check this out, but just sharing like a few of the really like juicy pieces with them.
What about referring people to like Instagram or your blog or whatever? Like there's different places where you can talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you do that in a course?
Oh,
like,
for
if
sure.
you want more information, go check out these blogs I've written.
Yeah, absolutely. The main thing that we want to do is remember that like every time we're teaching something, it's going to be attached to like homework or an action or something. So we never want to feel like we're creating too many competing requests. Like, okay, what I actually need you to do to get through this course is to do this homework assignment. But then if we also go, oh, but I have these articles on my blog, pretty much can guarantee people are going to go to the blog because it feels fun. So what can be nice is saying like, and in the resource library, I've linked some of my blog articles. So you can find more about this on my Instagram, but having it in a way where the priority is placed on what they're supposed to be doing as part of the course. Sorry, my cat just like almost knocked over my computer. Okay, there we go. How does that land?
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Can I ask a follow-up?
I see Karen has her hand up, and then we'll hop back over to you, Alice.
I just wanted to share something about how I do my bonuses, because I have a 12-week course, 12-week program, and I've got a introduction video, short introduction video, telling them what's going on in the for that week. And then I've got usually 3 lessons, so 3 separate videos, and then a closing video. And then I have a little star bonus. And usually I put something, maybe fun or interesting or something, and people love it because I don't like make a big deal about it because it's like nice to have stuff. It's not like need to have. And so I don't like really talk about it too much. I might mention it, but I don't really like, there's nothing to do with it. There's never any homework or anything like that. It's just like, here's a little bonus. And some people are like, oh, I always like go and peek to see what the bonus is first. But I just thought I'd bring that up for Michelle, because that's just maybe a way to, when you've got that something that you just kind of want to put in there, you can just have that little bonus section at the end, or it's almost like a little, I have it at the end, like after the closing. So it's kind of like a little treat at the end. It's like, and on the checklist, it's, I have a checklist for each thing that they need to do. And the last one is the bonus. So it's like, it's kind of like they're trying to get the treat, at the end too. So just an idea.
Oh, I love that. That's so good. Thanks for sharing that. Alice, you said you had a follow-up.
Yeah, just regarding what you were saying about like being mindful on competing requests, would you say, like, as a general rule of thumb, each video should have just one action step, one request? Or like, is there like a thoughtful way of making several requests in one video as part of one module? Like trying not to overwhelm, but it's all maybe part of like this one process. They have to do X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm. Oh, such a good question. So in general, whenever possible, and I recognize it's not always possible, but the dream is to not leave all the kind of action requests to the end of the module. So if our module is made up of multiple videos, like multiple lessons, the more that we can go one lesson, one little action that builds towards the, the goal of the module, the better, because it just feels like more bite-sized. Like if we think about it like cooking a recipe, if we had to watch an entire demonstration on like making cookies where it was like, okay, you're going to do like your butter, your eggs, your sugar, this, that, add your flour, do this, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now go do it. We'd be like, wait, what? I have to go back and watch all these things, instead of like, okay, step 1, let's put butter and sugar in the thing. Go do that. Now come back to the next step. So the more that we can like have people layer on the steps, the better. I recognize that depending on the homework activity, sometimes that's just not possible. Like sometimes there are things we're asking people to do. So if we are making a larger ask, we want to ask ourselves, how can I support them in making this feel easy and clear? Is it by giving them a checklist? Is it by giving them a roadmap? Is it by giving them a template or something like that? How does that resonate for you?
It does. I did realize, I think we're using different language. By module, I meant like one video. You're talking about, like, I think what I meant to say was like lesson. So like one ask per one lesson versus multiple asks in just one lesson.
Okay. Yeah. So when I say module, I kind of use that to be like the container that wraps around multiple lessons. I know some people flip them the other way around. So thanks for clarifying that. So yeah, in general, we want to try to make just like one ask per lesson. Sometimes there can be sub steps to that. So if it might be like, we're going to have you create let's say it's a course on building out a website. Like we're going to have you create the draft of your homepage. So first step is go find the images you want to use. Step 2 is like draft the copy using this frame or something like that. In general, we just want to make sure that all the different actions that we're asking people to do aren't taking like a huge amount of time, like ideally less than 20 minutes. But you can go up to like 30 or 40, depending on the subject matter. But really, it's just, again, kind of to reduce that overwhelm and reduce that procrastination. If people know it's going to take a lot of time, they're going to push it off and be like, I don't want to do that right now. I'll come back to it when I have more time, which as adults, let's be real, that doesn't happen. How does that feel? Good. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Any other questions kind of around overwhelm before we move on to our 4th and final horseman? Okay. So our fourth and final horseman is boredom. And so boredom can show up in a couple of different ways. And whenever I talk about boredom, I know people get a bit stressed because all of a sudden they feel like, oh my goodness, do I have to put in a bunch of gamification into my course? Do I have to show up in fun outfits? Do I have to be like, wow, like show up like super high energy? Like, what does that actually mean? So there's a couple different ways of looking at boredom in the learning experience. The first and the most kind of like prevalent one is relevance. And that is that, again, when we're dealing with adults who have competing priorities, who are making the choice to invest in us, who are making the choice to take this learning experience for whatever their motivations may be, for wanting the goal of it, for wanting the change in their life, the change in their business, whatever it may be, we are short on time, we're short on energy, we're short on all of these things. And so we don't have time for things that don't feel relevant. So we've already talked about kind of how to tackle that in the sense of looking at the needs to have versus the nice to have through that lens of what takes action. But sometimes there are things that we need to teach that don't feel directly connected to what it is the person came in to join the program for. So it's kind of coming back to that example. I always end up talking in like website design like examples. I'm not sure why. But thinking about someone who comes into this course and they're so excited and they're like, I just can't wait to design my website. I'm so hungry for it. I want to get my website live. And then they're doing this exercise on brand values and they're like, well, that's not teaching me how to wireframe a page. Like that's not teaching me how to edit this about me page. And when we have that, what feels like that dissonance between what the person wants and what they're being taught, that can create some friction in the learning experience. And so what we can do is one, have a hard talk with ourselves about why we're including things, to make sure that we're including it from a place of like service. It needs to be part of the journey. It is something that people need to do. They need to learn, they need to take action on, versus not just like, but I'm an expert in this and everything feels important to me because we're so fused with our expertise. And so if we know this is absolutely essential, then the easiest thing you can do for people is to communicate why it's essential. Why am I starting here? Why am I teaching you this? Why are we doing this? By including the why and sharing how it connects to the larger vision of what's being taught, we can instantly set people at ease, because it doesn't, then we're less likely to run into the situation where our learners are feeling like cheated or betrayed or like, why are you doing this for me? So an example that I like to use is that when people drip out course content. I joined this membership once and they released a new course to you every month. And I remember writing them and I was like, why is it this way? Because I want the course that's in month 3. I don't need the first 2 courses. And they were like, well, no, like that's just the way it's set up. And there wasn't actually a reason beyond the fact it was a membership retention strategy. And that felt really like icky to me. But I was like, oh, you're forcing me to be in this community and I'm not able to access what I want right away because you just want people to stick around longer. And I was like, don't like it. And I quit. I left. I canceled my subscription. Versus if they had said to me, regardless of where you are, we need you to start with the foundations course. And even if you move through it really quickly, we need you to implement those habits for 3 weeks. Like we need you to actually sit and take the action. And you can't, like, we know from experience, if you don't do that for 3 weeks, like you're not ready for the second course. If there's an intentionality behind why you're slowing people down, why you're restricting access, why you're including something, then people are going to be like, okay, I trust you. I see what you're doing here. And so we want to just keep coming back to the, like, why are we making our choices? Why are we setting things up a certain way? So making sure that we're always communicating why things are being included and why things are relevant. We can also kind of increase that sense of relevancy through like the examples that we use. If we're giving examples, we're showing case studies, that type of thing, making them as relevant as possible to people's situations is really, really powerful. We want to just make sure that there's not going to be that boredom on that intrinsic motivation level of like, I have this goal, I have this motivation. Now we can also talk about boredom from the more kind of like extrinsic motivation, is the things that just make things feel fun. And this is where I don't want you to do anything beyond being yourself. To like, I know sometimes we can feel like, oh, like, to make things fun and entertaining and not like boring for people, I have to suddenly like be on my videos. Like I have to suddenly like show up with all this energy and like, hi, like welcome to this learning experience. And like, if that's you and that's how you show up, then like, awesome. But if you're more calm and you're more like, I'm just going to be here with my cup of tea and like my cat on my lap, like that's great. Because the thing that makes things not boring is like when you're a human, when you're not talking like a robot, you're not talking like an Instagram influencer. If you're not an Instagram influencer, that's what makes people buy into the experience of like, okay, I know that you've thought about like how to make this an intentional journey for me. I know you're talking about how to keep it relevant and why I'm doing things in a certain way. And now you're showing up with like your super awesome energy. I can see you've like thought about ways to make this fun and engaging for me. And like, that's awesome. And so like, there are like other things we can do. Like we can talk about, in terms of like visual design of your program or like of your videos of, if we want to add in like gamification and things like that. But those are all like the cherry on top of what is already like the sundae of perfection of your course. And so that's why I don't like to put a huge emphasis on them, because when you take the time to intentionally architect your journey, when you take the time to like think about how you're crafting it, how you want to support your people, and then you show up as your awesome self, like really, those are the best experiences. So I know I just shared a lot with you, sharing a lot about Boredom, the fourth horseman. So before we kind of do a summary and then open it up for kind of general Q&A, does anyone have any specific questions around boredom and how it shows up in online courses and what we can do to kind of combat it? Yeah, Michelle, go for it.
So is this being recorded for other people to see?
It is, yeah. I share it out with my full community. So anyone on the list can catch this. Yeah.
Well, I'll just stick my neck out anyways. One of the things that I struggle with is I'm looking for role models because I'm not a boss babe. I mean, I'm 64 years old. And I have a nice, I think, personality, but I think I can present better. I'm always trying to improve my presentation. So when you're talking about being yourself, it's really important for me to figure out how to improve my presentation, because I usually present live and now I'm going to record. So that might be easier in some ways. But, when I do the live sessions, how to be true to myself and yet be even more engaging. And that's a whole other skill, especially when I'm presenting something live. I find it, between looking at the camera and my notes and the PowerPoint, I don't know, that's a whole other level. That's not the architecture of the course. That's about how we present ourselves so we're not boring. And I don't think I'm boring. I've got good feedback, but I feel that it's a skill that I certainly have to keep working on. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, facilitation it's a whole thing, and it is a skill. It's a lifelong skill. Like even, I've been facilitating like live experiences for like at least 15 years now, and I'm still constantly learning and growing as a facilitator. And so I feel like there's kind of like two places to start for that. One, I love what you said about like wanting to show up as yourself and feel like yourself and still like kind of draw on these facilitation skills. So one thing that I think is really helpful is whenever we're doing anything live, whether it's like physically in person or it's virtual like this, is asking yourself, like, how can I set up my environment so I feel the most like me? So if it's like, if you have an outfit that you feel really good in, if you have a way of styling that feels really good, if you have a candle or a perfume or like an animal or a drink or like anything where you're like, ooh, this feels like me, it helps me access that like true authentic me. That can be a really good way of like kind of helping like settle the nervous system around like, ooh, this is like scary and I feel like I have to be someone else. So that's kind of like one way of doing things. Now, when it comes to facilitating, and I feel like I could do a whole course cafe on this, so I probably will. But one of the tips that I find can be really, really helpful in the beginning is to just verbalize what you're doing whenever you feel like you have to do it. Like, I'm just going to check my notes right now, or I'm just going to make sure that like my PowerPoint slide's loaded, or I'm just going to click to the next slide or something like that. It can be a helpful way of, it is actually really nice for the participant to be like, oh, that's what's happening right now. but also of like kind of resettling yourself in your presence, because sometimes we can put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. Like, I'm going to look at the camera the whole time, but kind of use part of my eyes over here to like catch my notes, or I'm going to do this or do that. And by just being able to like give ourselves that small structural piece of like vocalizing what's happening, it can start to make things feel more comfortable. And of course, there's a whole bunch of other facilitation things we can get into, and I think I probably will in a future time. But that's probably like where I would start. How does that resonate for you?
It's a start. I mean, I'm actually not afraid. I mean, I facilitated in person for years and years, but it's a totally different experience online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm going to sign up for your course about group coaching, because I love being in a room, and that energy in person, it's a totally different experience, I find, doing it online.
Yeah. Yeah.
And having to deal with the tech and myself. You know, I'm getting better, but I know I have a way to go, because I don't want to be, isn't that I think I'm just boring, but be more connected. How do you connect with people online, you know, like this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah, I think group call confidence would be like a great start for you, because there's lots of like little like facilitation tips and tricks and hacks and scripts and things like that. And then also like full permission when it comes to the tech thing to like choose the tech that feels the least overwhelming in the beginning. Like for me, even now, I really don't like using slides. I just find it adds like a layer of complexity that like I don't love. So that's why I run these course cafes without slides, because like I love just being able to show up and connect with people in this capacity. So if there's certain pieces that are feeling really overwhelming to start with, like full permission just to like take those off the table for now. And then like, you know, get yourself feeling confident in other areas of facilitating virtually, and then layer them back in.
Thank you.
Karen, yeah, go for it.
I just want to say, so I've facilitated in person for like, am I still muted?
Oh, there you go. You're good. Couldn't hear you at first. Now you're good.
I just wanted to say that I used to facilitate, I still do, but I was facilitating in person for like 20 years. And then I started my online course just a couple of years ago. And the tech thing was totally new to me. I used to be the self-proclaimed like least techie person in the world. And I kind of I brought my community on the journey with me. And I would say, okay, you guys, you know, I'm learning tech. I wouldn't say like, oh, I'm so bad at tech, or I can't do tech. I would just say I'm learning, just to kind of put them at ease. Like, I'm trying, I am, you know, but this is new to me. And I just like called it out. And now, I mean, I've taken people on the journey and said, like, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to share my screen now, you know, and I'd make a little joke about it and be like, you know, let's see if this works, and, you know, hang in there with me and stuff. And people kind of got to know that, you know, I was just still learning. And it takes time, and I've gotten better at it. And people make comments now like, Karen, you've come such a long way, you know, with your tech, and I can't believe you know how to do this now. And, you know, so it's just kind of a, you know, bringing them along on the journey and calling it what it is. It's like, I'm just learning. And so many of them also are learning too. So.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. That's so great. And then I saw Alice also shared, I like physical gestures, like moving my hands, my head, turning away, looking like I'm thinking when I am, drinking water, because those are things I would do in person. So they help the audience feel more engaged, even if it's pre-recorded. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I think that's like one of the things is sometimes when we move into the virtual space, we can suddenly feel like things have to be different. Like we have to show up a different way. But the more you can be like, how would I show up in person? And am I telling myself a story that I can't do things just because it's virtual, when really like we could? Yeah, such great questions. So just to kind of summarize what we've talked about today, because I know we've dove into just so many fun things. We've really talked about the kind of 4 horsemen of the course apocalypse. So we started with procrastination, which is, you know, people who are putting off starting or engaging with the course experience. And one of the biggest ways that we can combat procrastination is by making things as accessible as possible. How do we remove barriers, whether that's through length of material, whether that's through addressing fear or other blocks that might be causing or triggering that procrastination? Then we talked about confusion. So when people are like, what's going on? What's happening? Like, I don't know what I should be doing. We talked about how you can combat that at the macro level by having a really strong program orientation, and at the micro level by being really, really clear with your directions. I want you to take action this way. I want you to do this exercise. I want you to use this workbook. Then we talked about overwhelm and how it's probably the most prevalent one. And one of the best things you can do is by being really intentional about what goes into your learning experience. So asking yourself every step of the way, is this a nice to have or a need to have? What are the actions that my people need to take? Is what I'm including in this experience going to help them take action? And if it's something that you're like, it's a nice to have, but I still really want to include it, you can like tuck that into like a resource or a bonus library. And then we talked about boredom and how one of the things you can do is by making sure you're explaining why things are the way they are in your program, why you're teaching a concept, why it's in a certain order, whatever that may be, so that it's relevant to your learner's experience. And then also that you just get to show up as your awesome self, because that is one of the most engaging things, is when you're just showing up as your full, amazing human, talking to the humans on the other side of the screen. So those are the 4 horsemen of the course apocalypse. We still have like 3 minutes left. So if there are any other questions, either about what we've talked about today, or just in general around your programs, the floor is yours. If anyone wants to share anything. Yes, Leanne, go for it.
Hi, thank you. This is good. Glad I caught it. I have not yet created a program. I've done some training in person and also online, but with a group I'm very familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, because what I'm thinking of is how to get keep people's attention in going through a course. So what I've been thinking of doing is creating the course and doing an overlay with a video so that I'm coaching them through it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you found that that is any more helpful, or doesn't really make a difference in terms of engaging someone when they're learning?
I think it can be really, really powerful to have that like face-to-face connection with you. So just to make sure I'm understanding right, you kind of have like be sharing your screen and be kind of like walking through like, here's this concept, or here's how we're teaching it, or that type of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
No, not live.
Oh, yeah, but like
pre-recorded.
pre-recorded.
Yeah. And then have the little superimposed video on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that can be really, really helpful. I think the more we can include those like face-to-face moments in a program, it can be really great, instead of just like, now go do this thing, or now go share this concept. And the one thing I would kind of caution is sometimes those overlay explanations can get really long. Like we're starting to do a loom and all of a sudden we're like, ooh, I've been talking for like 15 minutes. So kind of keeping yourself again, like with that focus of, this is the concept I'm teaching, or this is the case study I'm walking them through. But I think, that sounds really, really powerful.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Alice, yes.
So when you first introduced the topic, you said you were going to talk about these 4 horsemen. I initially thought you meant like for ourselves as course creators. So when we're overwhelmed, we're confused, we're bored with the course creation process.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if you would do like a separate course cafe on that, or if like almost like applying everything that you just said for our audience, but for ourselves, like. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I love that. I can definitely talk about that more in depth. I'm just going to make a note here because that's awesome for yourself. I mean, I do think that a lot of the approaches, like for yourself, for your people, can be similar, because a lot of it comes back to intentionality and kind of like questioning why we're doing things. So often, like if we think about like procrastination, we're like, oh, I've just been putting this off. Is it that we're afraid of what it looks like to put a course out there in the world? We're afraid of like what it would mean to like have this amazing program? Or is it that there's a barrier of like, we're telling ourselves, oh, I've just been putting off making my slides for these videos. And it's like, well, I don't have slides. It's like that, like almost like that intentional of like, permission to just be like, oh, I don't have to do that if I don't want. I feel like I have so much I could say on this topic. So like, I will definitely do some follow-up on there. But do you feel like there's one that's showing up for you more than the others that you would like me to talk about now?
I mean, I think for me, it's between confusion and overwhelm, and almost like like I'm in the process right now where I'm trying to figure out like who to work with as far as like either a business coach or like a course creation program or like a business strategist, because I confuse and overwhelm myself in terms of like, well, what's the next thing I should work on? Not what eventually needs to get done, but doesn't need to get done right now, but like literally within my business, within my program, what's the next step, or what questions do I need to answer right now?
Yeah.
So I get like confused, overwhelmed, stuck there. And when I feel those things, then there's procrastination, and then there's boredom. Nothing is getting done.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. I'm just smiling because Karen's like, hire Emily. And I'm like, like shameless plug here. Actually, no shame, because the incubator is amazing. And like, honestly, I do think it would be what you need. So the incubator, for those of you who may not know, is my 4-month group coaching program where I literally lead you through like, this is the vision for your program. Here's what you do next. Here's what you do next. Here's what you do next. Oh, you're feeling stuck. Let's talk about that. Like, and you go from having this idea to mapping out your full curriculum, to building your materials, to launching. And as part of the incubator, you get a step-by-step action plan. So there isn't that confusion around like, what should I be focusing on and when? And my approach with everything that I do is there's no cookie cutters. There's no like, everyone does the same thing. Everyone follows the same path. It's every step of the way. How do you want to feel? What are your goals? What's your business goal? What's your program goal? And how do we take what we know about how people learn, take what we know about the various strategies available to us, and then weave them together into an approach that feels really good for you. So, I mean, there's definitely like some other little things we can do along the way to help with confusion and overwhelm. But honestly, I find that when it comes to bringing a program to life, working with someone who has designed so many different programs and designs in a way that works for you and for your people, like really, I think the incubator would be like the perfect fit for you right now.
So, I mean, I have considered the incubator. My concern is within the 4-month time span, because when I previously committed to group programs that were intended on create your program within even the next year, once I start falling behind, it basically all falls apart. So like I was even thinking like a one-on-one approach, but I don't know if there's space in the incubator to fall behind, to make up later, to go back to like if I am falling behind.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the incubator, really it's self-paced in the sense that like you get to kind of there's no behind compared to the group. And that's why I designed it to be evergreen, where it's like you come in, you're given your path. You have lifetime access to the materials. The only thing that's time bound is like the group calls and the milestones. But I've also had people who are like, I'm chugging along, I'm doing great. And then they hit about month 2 and they're like, my personal life exploded. And then we go, that's great. We're just going to hit pause. These months don't count. You come back to me when you're ready. So the reason I keep things small and intimate in the incubator is so that you get the support you need when you need it, so that I can be like present and engage with you like every step of the way. So I think you and I can kind of, if you want to DM me on Instagram, we can chat about like one-to-one or the incubator and what works well for you and kind of when would be the ideal time for you to start. I am doing a promo right now where if you sign up by the end of November, you get December as like a bonus month. So it doesn't count. So it's like 5 months instead of 4. So it gives you a bit more time. But really the thing is like, I wanted to design the program so there's not a sense of like, I'm behind. It's like you're right on time for your own schedule.
Yeah, I would love to chat with you more, so I can DM you.
Yeah. Sounds great. Thanks for asking. Okay, Karen, we have time for your question, and then we are going to wrap up for today.
I was just wondering if you had a couple little ideas for, am I still on?
I just missed yeah, I can hear you. I just always miss the first like 2 seconds of what you're saying. Okay, go for it.
Okay. So I was wondering if you had a couple ideas that, when to kind of incentivize people when they hit milestones. Do you have some fun things that you could suggest? Just like nothing that's real, what's the word? Just kind of fun and yeah.
So, I mean, it kind of depends on like logistics and budget and that type of thing. So there's things where like you can actually send people something in the mail, which obviously requires like more logistics and more money. So I've done things like send affirmation cards, send crystals, send presents.
I'm in Africa.
You're in Africa, so like none of that
doesn't work.
Yeah, none of that. So I mean,
it'll get lost.
virtual can be really great. So like on the free level, you can like send personalized Loom videos like, oh my goodness, Karen, you just did this thing. I'm so proud of you. Congratulations. I've had clients who get like have little QR codes that you scan and it takes you to a page that has a video it's not personalized, but it's like, yay, you made it, confetti, like this is great. You know, like
What do you mean a QR code? How does that work?
So like
it's in the
it's like
in the
actually like
course?
in the course, and then like they can like
Uh-huh.
scan it, or like you could like click it and that, you know, it could be a link, it could be a QR code or something like that. It could be in their workbook even, and they scan it and then it links to a page on your site that has like a video or like, yay, you did it. You know, let us know and we'll PayPal you $10 and you can go buy a coffee to celebrate or something like that. It depends like if you want to spend money or not spend money. If you just want it to be like free and easy, then I would say like personalized video sale or like page on your website, an email saying like you're awesome, celebrating you, a shout out in the community, just like anything, or even sometimes just being like asking them, how are you going to celebrate? Because we kind of as a culture aren't great at celebrating. So like, you know, just saying like, how are you going to celebrate this so we can celebrate with you?
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for showing up live and asking like all your amazing questions. The replay will be sent out over the next couple of days. And of course, if there's ever anything specific you want me to talk about on Course Cafes, you can always send me an email and be like, I'd love you to go into these topics. The November topic is going to be like publicly announced soon, but we're going to be talking about program orientations. So really, really good to help with like that confusion horseman that can sometimes show up. So thank you all so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll chat to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.